Hi, my name is Marley Dubrow, and this is Armaan, Walia. And we're doing our presentation on the early morning phone call, Somali Refugees Remittances by Lindley. Our activity is going to be a sit-down stand-up activity, so stand up if you receive money from a family, parent, or guardian. And then sit down if you use that money for exactly what its intended purpose was. So if you were given money for food, you're using it solely for that and not for clothing or Greek apparel or anything like that.
So before we get into that remittance, we want to define it, which is a sum of money sent in payments for goods or services or as a gift. Anna Lindley made this book as an attempt to understand remittance dynamics and effects in the Somali regions, which is a post-conflict area, and in the diaspora. So she does this between two key principles when she was doing the book. The one first key principle is remittance is more than money and is embedded in complex social relations. And two, remittances are transnational, meaning both the sending diaspora and the receiving country have to be studied. Thus, this book crosses borders as an example of understanding of a place as an articulation of power-filled and often geographical extensive social relations, which we will explain more in our presentation. To give some historical context to this, why Somalia is a post-conflict area. The civil war, which was started, came from resistance of the Said Barre regime in the 1980s. Clan-based opposition groups formed and overthrew Barre in 1991, which also produced Somaliland in 1991. The UN stepped in to kind of stabilize the region in 1992, unfortunately left in 1995, as factional fighting continued, especially within the south, and the transitional federal government formed in 2004 to establish some sort of government, but failed. And in 2006, Ethiopia went in to stop or halt Al-Shabaab, which was a radical Islamic terrorist group, which then also led in 2011, my apologies, to Kenya stepping in to stop radical Islam within the region.
So the focus of the book is the effects of Somalia's diaspora community on the state's post-conflict political economy and in shaping the relationship between citizens, state, and the international community. So there are going to be 3 diaspora communities that we're looking at in this book. It's going to be in London, England, Hargeisa, Somaliland, and Nairobi, Kenya. So just to understand this, we need to break down the history one more time. The Somali people are historically nomadic and pastoral people, and migration is just built into their way of life. And in the 70s and early 80s, migration was mostly to the Middle East due to the oil industry boom, so it was for economic reasons. However, in the late 1980s, throughout the 1990s, it was driven by conflict and political instability. Some social context for this was that remittances are beyond just finances. There's roughly 10.7 million Somali people living in the state, with a huge migrant population with strong clan ties, estimated at about 2 million. And this leads to a sense of obligation to send money back and also a social network through clans or kinsmanship. And it creates an economy of affection. For those who left, they were mostly of the urban and educated, and they were able to migrate based on economic opportunity, which led to a brain and muscle drain from Somalia. Remittances can also reinforce gender roles and hierarchies within family structures, creating a vector of power, and challenge the way in which refugees are viewed as helpless and ahistoric. Remittances have also become the largest industry in Somalia, with little revenue generated by the state. And it's become a very polarized topic in the international community. They're seen as possible funds to illegal or terrorist activity, but they can also be seen as a humanitarian lifeline. Looking at the process of remittances, they were previously overlooked by the development community as a symptom of war. However, now they're seen with legitimacy, and they're given a space in the economic and political discourse. And they're seen as a potential source of development capital and an economic buoy. To understand how these transfers are made, we need to first address who makes up the Somali diaspora and what constitutes as remittances. So it's a set of geographically dispersed people identifying with a shared homeland and engaging in some form of transnational activity. And remittances are a form of that transnational activity. There's generally money, though they can take other forms, and they're sent to a distant location. For this reading, they were sent generally to kinsmen and extended members of the same clan. Somalia lacks also the banking institutions to carry out money transfers, so the diaspora communities rely on Zawilad to transfer the money. It's a system of value transfer that originates from an Arabic word hawala, and money generally is paid to an agent who then instructs a remote associate to pay to the financial recipient. and it's working outside the formal channels of economic transactions. And the largest of these money transmitters for Somalia was Al Barakat. However, it came under intense scrutiny by the U.S. after 9/11 for fear of terrorist funding and was shut down. So some of the major themes throughout this work are the migration development linkages. The Somali diaspora does play a part in the development of the Somali regions. There's a lack of development plans and political stability, globalization, and containment, and the willing participation of such a vast portion of the population who benefit from remittance practices. Remittance flows aren't just beyond finances. They're complex social micro-foundations that shape how influential policymakers and their sustainability. Their driving factors of migration may change, but migration itself will not, and they must be able to work in the context of a mobile polity. Clan-based relationships are very important, and ties to clan remain strong even for members of the diaspora. And remittances have the ability to alter power relations. So women are given a space for more economic participation in sending and receiving remittances and are trusted to use them for the household benefit. And it furthers developmental inequality with families who are sending home substantial remittances who have higher quality of life than those who receive no remittances or they are very limited. And there's concern that remittances may lead to dependency on foreign assistance and it lacks an incentive to make their own incomes. Policymakers also need to understand Zawilad and the transfer of money in a stateless society. So the role of 9/11 and the international community need to understand how money could be transferred. Without a state-run banking system with regulations, it's difficult for citizens to find or trust formal institutions, which lead to reverting to smaller-scale money transactions. And there needs to be a differentiation between legitimate and illegitimate forms of hawala. The second major theme is global-local connections in conflict settings. Somalia's conflict represents development in reverse, so conflict undermines the development process. Conflict is constantly evolving and varies over time and space, and conflict does not merely destroy society, it also transforms it. It leads to an emergence of alternate systems which challenge, and there's some challenges in assessing these. The civil society has also become very active in the absence of the state, and there's a question of how people adapt to their new livelihoods. Diaspora is an important local global connection in that the diaspora can contribute to conflict and peace. So they could either fund rebel or terrorist groups, or remittances could be used to keep people out of poverty, build the economy, keep the youth population from turning to violent but well-funded groups who can offer in some instances more resources and a sense of purpose or agency. The diaspora is neither good nor bad. It's important to locate analysis of conflict and related information and transnational engagement in specific social contexts. And there needs to be a focus on diaspora's multidimensional material engagement. Development now needs the assistance of the international community in that remittances are transnational, and these countries and their policies towards Somalia can affect how the diaspora community views sending money home. And money can go into political campaigns, aiding rebel causes, etc., which creates a transnational aristocracy in which members of the diaspora actually receive a greater share of the political voice than those who they represent because they're better funded than the locals. And this slide just encapsulates the two viewpoints taken on remittances, how large the industry is, and how countries that house Somalis are forced to take political positions on issues happening in the Somali state that might not necessarily affect them. And the final theme throughout the book is the livelihood of refugees. It's important to first define what a refugee is. And in the book, Lindley used the 1951 convention relating to the status of refugees. A refugee is an individual who's outside their country of origin and face a well-founded fear of persecution for reasons relating to race, religion, nationality, or membership of a particular social group or political opinion. Many countries don't ascribe to this and offer minimal legal framework or assistance that determine status and thus give them temporary status. A theme throughout this book has been to analyze their resources, capability, and how refugees mobilize. There's a loss of human, socio-political, physical, natural, and financial resources that may have occurred, which leads to migration and it becomes very popular. And social and political networks can be changed because of this. There's a regime of protection and assistance to refugees, shapes their livelihood possibilities in important ways. There's an absence of durable solutions, results in refugees leading to complex and varied dispersion of the Somali population. The legal definition given to refugees can also affect their ability to make a livelihood. Remittances offer a chance of rehabilitation, and refugees are seen as not just helpless throughout this work, they can maintain agency and move beyond aid to self-sustainability. It also creates a remittance economy that shapes patterns of regional mobility and household reformation, which Armaan will talk about now.
Okay, so examples and evaluations. I'm going to talk about the 3 diaspora communities that she kind of discusses on. She spent a large amount of her time in her research and her surveys by consulting key figures, then conducted interviews, and her own surveys. She drew from NGO workers, government officials, and people of Somali origin. A suggestion that Marley and I decided was that she should have had someone of Somali origin conduct the interview while she kind of watched it. Because there's an inherent trust that could have been more beneficial, maybe more would have been given to her research. Even by her own mission early in the book, people aren't that willing to discuss migration due to the hardship that they face, and someone of a Somali origin might better understand that. And people don't want to discuss money as it is a personal kind of asset to them. So the first one is Hargeisa, Somaliland, which is the self-proclaimed capital of Somaliland in 1991. Though it is still technically part of Somalia, since it does not have international recognition. She did this by her surveys by informal consultation, interviews, and remittance from the largest company in the city, which is Dubrow. So she kind of looked at the transfers. She kind of used this example because it traces transnational social relationships underlying remitting and complex contingencies and repositories of migration, development, conflict relationships. So basically how remittance helped people cope with post-conflict economy, which kind of fits into the global-local connection theme that Marley described in conflict regions. Hargeisa was a good example because it was Somalia, but it was had stability. Unlike the rest, she kind of used the example of Nemo, who has her sons at home and daughters abroad, who she calls on for support, which illustrates 2 key points. Extended households are common, polygamy is very common, and a large family network is, so wide-ranging family networks. Town owners should assist the pastoralists, so those that have gone abroad to towns with better economic opportunities should help those back at home that are struggling, that are typically more farm-based. And 2 is remitting is increasingly gender-balanced in nature, and remittance relationships conform to traditional expectations in Somali society, as Marley touched upon, in that women should be more willing to assist their family, that they work to assist their family. This kind of was exemplified also with the return of people to Somaliland and people face economic challenges as in poor economic opportunities and homelessness and disarming of thousands of men. This kind of fell along with the theme of migration development linkages, which because remittance assisted to help this transition, and in case of Mohammed's family, who rehabilitated from camps to Somaliland. The data that Lindley had was showed that majority of people stating the household had no other sources of cash income other than remittance, so they got all their money from remittances, and people are able to kind of restart their lives due to that. The migration development theme kind of also extends to remittances, ripples out to a wider community, and show that consumption has useful second-round effects. In the 1990s, increased demand for services and jump-started the local economy, and development of several schools by the diaspora community was shown due to remittances. The next part is East Hella, Nairobi. East Hella is a neighborhood, and she did this by, she used this as an example because the dynamics of regional refugee migrations and how remittance helped people deal with displacement. Her surveys showed 2/3 receive remittances and showed the importance of diaspora in a global-local connection. Remittance economy shapes patterns of regional mobility and household formation, and as described by Marley, Kenya kind of has a loose and non-existent legal framework for these refugees that are kind of there. Because of this lack of legal framework, the livelihood of refugees relies heavily on remittances, as Kenya's law confined their opportunities. People are in East Hella to form a business and a pathway to the West. Because of this lack of legal framework, people kind of use East Hella as a way to get to London and the United States. It can solve legal troubles in informal economies, so refugees look outward for a solution and opportunity. The last one is London, England, and she just uses this because of its international context, and because of the social microdynamics of remitting from diaspora perspectives and implications of the violent origins of migration. The global-local connection in that she surveyed money transfers from the company Dubrow and did not sample a representative sample of remitters in London by her own admission, which we found was a fault. She should have had a more representative sample. The economic actions are intrinsically embedded in social relations as described in the migration development. Example, most common beneficiaries from Somali Londoners were siblings and parents, which was 71%. They do this because they wish to preserve inheritance through paying of implicit family loans. So basically, kind of the embedded connection that you have to your family and the necessity to assist them. Remitting has several types of effects just on the senders, not just the receivers, and that the senders suffer from poverty reinforced by remitting. They have stress and they have tension amongst family to provide and meet obligations for both the male and female side of the families. D was just a reflection on it, so the inside of African social being. Anna Lindley describes that improving political and economic infrastructure would maximize potential positive benefits of remittances, and we got to move beyond the question of is remittance good or bad, because it is both. And it emphasizes the communal aspect of African society and how social relations affect the economy. There's immense value in family networks. There is no core family. The aspect of African social reality being examined in Insight's Anthropology produces. The case of remittance in London, expression of debt resonated with anthropological concepts of generalized respiratory typical amongst kin. For many in the UK, sending remittances is critical in maintaining family well-being, as described. And the connection to other anthropologists we've read, Social Relations and Economy, with Hutchinson discussing the cattle complex in the Noor, how cattle and the Noor is more than just the economy, or Peter Euvin's Aiding Violence with the development projects that reinforce structural violence, remittances good and bad, as described. Professor Lupkin's work in Chaos and Culture with mass migration as a marker for instability and a precursor to possible violence, and uses development of victimacy and the role of agency may be exercised with it, along with that refugees kind of use this instability as an opportunity to better themselves. And the second part was how anthropology produces understanding. So an advantage is that the book can shape for future context of the work, and because she primarily focuses on the diaspora community, not just Somalia, she kind of understands the international implications of it. She uses a wide variety of input from NGO workers and refugees and government officials. But there are limitations of this book, repeatedly how she states that there is a lack of information and research for a variety of instances. The scope of remittance is still difficult to measure. There is not a lot of subject matter, this specific on the subject matter, and creating an own uniform survey of varying data. So she uses a difference of surveys wherever she went, whether it be London or Nairobi or Somaliland. So kind of we suggested that she should have a uniform way of surveying and kind of have better resources to kind of understand the expansive nature of remittance. So the questions that we wanted to do was Lindley, with the help of Professor Lupkin in the book, argued that diaspora community has become a third humanitarian actor with traditionally NGOs and United Nations dominating the humanitarian space. Though the two groups, diaspora versus Western agencies, are suspicious of each other, diaspora community is weary of the politicized nature of aid, while Western agencies are suspicious of Somali micro-politics and their need to follow their own bureaucratic natures and standards. So how do we bridge these three actors, the United Nations, NGOs, and now this diaspora community? Lindley also argues that even with the peace and development of migration will always be inherent in Somali culture. Do we agree with that assessment? And two, is migration a source of instability in itself? So kind of assessing these questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you.